Welcome. I'd like to introduce you tonight's speaker, Deborah Weiss, Esquire, Senior Fellow for Center for Security Policy. Deborah is an attorney, author, and public speaker specializing in free speech and terrorism-related issues, and is considered an expert on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and CARE. Formerly, she was the Manhattan Director for the Forbes for President campaign, Assistant Corporation Counsel in the Giuliani administration, and a counsel for the Committee on House Oversight in Congress. She is the author of a monograph titled The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad Against Free Speech. The primary writer and researcher for the book Council on American Islamic Relations, Its Use of Lawfare and Intimidation, and a contributing author to the book Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Terrorist Network. Her most recent monograph is Islamist Influence in Hollywood. Ms. Weiss is a regular contributor to Front Page Magazine. Her articles have also been published in National Review Online, The Weekly Standard, The Washington Times, Human Events Online, and American Thinker. She speaks regularly throughout the United States and is a frequent guest on radio. Ms. Weiss is also a survivor from the 9/11 attacks in New York City. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce Deborah Weiss.
Well, I want to thank Doreen for inviting me to speak and the Michigan Jewish Affairs Council. I was very surprised to learn about this organization, and I'm glad somebody is acting as a political conservative voice for the Jewish people. It's anomalous to have an organization like this. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule to come and attend this event. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit about the importance of free speech, the push towards censorship in the Islamist movement, and how it's impacting the Michigan governor's race. So freedom of speech is a cornerstone freedom. Without it, you can't have other freedoms. It's not true that all rights are equal. Some are more important than others, and freedom of speech is a foundational freedom. Without freedom of speech, you don't have religious freedom. Without freedom of speech, you don't have human rights. Without freedom of speech, you can't have political dissent. So it's very, very important. In America, we have the First Amendment. It is unique. We have more free speech in this country than anywhere in the world. We don't do a balancing test the way they do in Europe, where they balance offense versus free speech. In this country, you are free to speak your mind if the statements are true, even if they're offensive, and you're allowed to voice your opinion. There are ever-increasing encroachments on freedom of speech in the West, even in America. They come from different quarters, primarily from the far left and from various Islamic organizations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those organizations. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC. So how many people here have heard of the OIC? Oh, that's very good. I'm glad. Very good. Some places I go, nobody's ever heard of them. So, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with them, they are comprised of 56 UN member states, plus the Palestinian Authority. They are the largest voting bloc in the UN, and most people never heard of them. And they do have as their long-term mission the establishment of an Islamic caliphate and worldwide Sharia law. And in furtherance of this aim, they are seeking to silence and ultimately criminalize free speech, and the West is the target. The West is the target because in the Muslim countries, they already have blasphemy, and large segments of the entire world already don't have free speech, so they're targeting the places that do. And just for those of you who don't know, may I assume that most of you know what Sharia is, or? So I'll just be very brief for those of you who don't know. First of all, I'm not saying all Muslims, and I want to be very clear about that. There are people who identify themselves as Muslim for whatever reason, their heritage, and they don't embrace all aspects of Sharia, so I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about specific organizations that do have as their ultimate goal to establish a caliphate. And for those of you who don't know, Sharia is not the same as religion the way we understand it in the West. Here we have civil laws. You practice your faith on your own, but it's civil laws, one law for everybody, whether you're black or white, male or female, Jewish, Christian, atheist. But in Sharia, there are bifurcated laws. Muslims get priority over non-Muslims, men get priority over women. There's institutionalized discrimination, and there's cruel and unusual violent punishment as part of their criminal penalties, all of which would be unconstitutional in America. So that's what we're talking about for those of you who aren't familiar with them. The OIC started promoting this idea called combating defamation of religions. I'll just call it defamation of religions for short. If they were to come here and ask for blasphemy laws, which is what they want, nobody would listen to them. They'd be laughed out of the room. So instead they came and they used language that was more palatable. They'll say, let's be respectful, let's be politically correct, let's be responsible, and let's have resolutions so that we can combat defamation of religions. That sounds nice. We don't want to defame anybody. So those resolutions were introduced into the UN at the time, the Commission on Human Rights in 1999, and they were passed every single year all the way through 2010. However, when the OIC uses the word defamation, they don't mean it the same way we mean it. In the American legal system, it's only a defamatory comment if it's a false statement of fact. Truth is a defense, and as I said, opinion is protected speech. In Islam, if you say something negative about it, true though it may be, that's defamation. If you report a fact, like Islamic terrorists are flying planes into buildings on 9/11, if you say it in a critical way, that's defamation. So they don't mean the same thing by it. And eventually the West started to realize that this concept has dire consequences, or potentially dire consequences, for freedom of speech. And under then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, she asked the OIC to draft an alternative resolution that would retain free expression and still address the OIC's concerns for alleged Islamophobia. They came up with the now infamous Resolution 1618 to combat intolerance based on religion or belief. And it sounded like an improvement because the phrase defamation was dropped. We don't want to have intolerance based on people's religion. But the OIC still had their own goals. They did not change their vision, and they wound up manipulating the language to still mean what they wanted it to mean. And I'll give you a specific example. We signed on to this. It said that we will criminalize speech that incites violence, right? In America, it's imminent violence. You're not allowed to incite imminent violence. You're not allowed to say, I want you all to get together tomorrow at 2 o'clock and go murder, and you can fill in the blank. So this person or these people or this group. So we signed on to it. But that's not what they mean. You know, we're going by the language. The language has to specifically encourage that act. They use what they call a test of consequences. It is retrospective. So, for example, and this is the example they give, not my example, when they had those Danish cartoons, you remember the cartoons where they drew the picture of Muhammad and there were riots in Denmark and riots in the Middle East? Well, they would say that that was inciting violence because you just drew a cartoon. If you say your opinion, it's basically the same thing again. If you commit blasphemous speech, if you insult Islam, and riot behavior results, then the person responsible for that behavior is the person who drew the picture, made the comment, produced the film, and not the person who committed the violence. So it's not a theory of personal responsibility, the way we understand it in the Judeo-Christian tradition or in the American legal system. So that's where we are. It wouldn't really have been that bad if they had just left it as a resolution, but they decided, again, I hate to say, but under Hillary Clinton, with the head of the OIC, to start an implementation process, which I'm letting you know is not the norm. UN resolutions are not legally binding. They are political statements. Yes, they carry a lot of weight. Nonetheless, they're just statements, unless you choose to turn it into an implementation process and actually implement it. And that is what happened. It started in America, in DC, in 2011, in December. They had approximately 30 countries and non-governmental organizations around the globe attend, trying to find the best practices. Much of it was in closed-door sessions. And they did some other things also, but on this issue, the emphasis seemed to be on how to combat so-called Islamophobia in the West, the freest country in the world. By law, Muslims are treated the same way as everybody else here, and that was the focus. I've met so many people that live in bubbles, usually the younger generation. I hope you folks are a little bit more informed, but if you pay attention to what's going on in Turkey, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, you will see that it's not just Jews and Christians and Baha'is and Zoroastrians that are totally discriminated against, or women, or gays. It's Muslims who are also discriminated against. If they have a different interpretation, or if they're homosexual, or whatever, if they want to leave their religion, that's a death penalty. So those are true human rights violations. In Saudi, we complain about ISIS beheading people. Saudi Arabia beheads people in the public square, legally, part of their penal system. We don't say anything about that. So who are they beheading? Their citizens are all Muslim. They're beheading people, and we're silent about it. So this process has not focused on any of the infractions of human rights violations that I mentioned. The focus is on Islamophobic speech in the West. So that's what that implementation process is. It's called the Istanbul process. And so that's Resolution 1618. And in 2005, they launched a program of action to combat Islamophobia. Their goal was to get a UN resolution that would denigrate Islamophobia. According to the OIC, it's the responsibility of the entire international community to do this. It's not just the responsibility of Muslims. Everybody needs to jump on board. And they also want similar laws in Europe. So they've called on nation states. They often work with parliaments in the EU to try to pass domestic laws that do the same. Right now, in the EU, in European countries, virtually all of them have some form of restrictive speech laws. They're called different names. Sometimes they're called hate speech laws. Sometimes they're called denigration of a recognized religion. Sometimes they're actually public order laws, like you're disrupting the public order, and it'll be along the same lines of that Danish cartoon example I gave. Like, you said something, everybody, was upset, and who's responsible? You, for violating the public order laws. Sorry. And the EU right now is in the process, just so you know, of criminalizing those laws. They're not just, right now, a lot of the countries issue civil fines, money if you engage in this speech, but many of the countries are turning it into criminal laws. And actually, the EU Commission has issued a framework decision encouraging uniformity across the EU countries, which isn't all of Europe, about 22 countries, to have criminalization of this speech. The Muslim Brotherhood front groups they have the same goals. The only difference is they operate in a different manner. The OIC works through international organizations, through like the UN. They work through consensus building, legal instruments. The Muslim Brotherhood front groups have grassroots campaigns, and they're focused primarily on the US and Canada. Organizations that I'm sure if you're in Michigan, you could not have avoided hearing about, like CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, Muslim Students Association, ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America, and there's a whole long list at the back of the 1991 explanatory memorandum, which is the Muslim Brotherhood's strategy to achieve, quote, a civilization jihad in America, and to sabotage the West from within using the words are their hands and the hands of believers. So when they say their hands, they're talking about the non-Muslims, and the hands of the believers, they're talking about the Muslims. So there has a whole list back there. There are more organizations than what's listed on there because that was from 1991 and more have evolved, but you can get a sense of what's going on there. This document, by the way, was entered into evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which was the largest terror financing trial in the history of the United States, without objection from the defense, just so you know. CARE and really has, I wrote a whole book on CARE, by the way. It wasn't under my name, like I'm scribbled in there really teeny because they were afraid I was going to get sued, but whatever. It's the censorship is a very, very small part of their long-term strategy. I don't want to digress too much and go into the other areas of it, but the censorship part of it is really across the board, putting pressure on radio stations to cancel radio shows like Michael Graham, who was absolutely fired because of pressure from CARE, just for stating, I heard that. It was funny. I accidentally seem to always hear the show that winds up being referenced later. I mean, he made some kind of out there comments, but he's a radio show host. He said it was his opinion, and he invited calls for people who had a different opinion. He challenged them. So he was off the air, fired for that. Radio corporations have, and I was astonished. You can go look it up if you want to get that book. I won't get the money, but I don't care. For you to get educated, I knew CARE was bad, but when I started doing the research, by the time I was done, my shoulders were up to my ears. It is astonishing, the breadth of the impact that they have had, and nobody's really connecting the dots on corporations who have changed their products, their package designs, their internal production procedures to make sure that they don't defame Islam. You know, Liz Claiborne, Nike, I mean, I could give you what the examples are, changing the design on the back of the sneaker because it kind of looks like the word air, Nike Air, kind of looked like the word Allah. If you stood on your head and put your left leg behind your right ear and turned your head, well, it sort of looked like the word Allah, so they had to change that. You know, all kinds of, and other Islamic groups putting pressure and similar things. I don't think it was CARE, but they did it with Burger King, the packaging on the cone, you know, Liz Claiborne, beer companies, banks, it just goes, it's an incredible list that you really wouldn't believe, putting pressure on politicians to censor their language, putting pressure on, for example, the AP, the Associated Press, to come out with a guideline and change their language on Islamic terrorism. And they'll put it all in the context, as will the OIC, of responsible speech. So I'm letting you know, responsible speech means censorship. That's what the result of this is. So they do it with corporations. Now, this part isn't necessarily CARE, but prestigious universities have been towing the same lines. I can't even go to Georgetown anymore. I really just can't. I come home and just, if you have kids, please don't send your kids to Georgetown. The nerve they have to call it a Jesuit school. You go to the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, which is a Saudi-financed center. Half the women in the audience are hijabbed, and they are just a mouthpiece for Islamic propaganda. And I've rarely heard, if ever, heard anything that comes out of their mouth that's accurate. But they get huge amounts of money from Saudi Arabia and all the Middle Eastern programs around the U.S. do in the graduate schools. Harvard, a lot of schools. So that's another one. On campuses, speakers are shut down if they want to talk about this issue. Politicians get a lot of flack. If you look at what happened to, you know, Michelle Bachmann and several others, not for making a statement, for asking a question. So you might not agree with these things, or you might have a different view. First of all, I think we should try to focus and learn facts instead of render opinions a priori, which a lot of people seem to have opinions before researching it. I have to just tell you, a lot of this stuff might sound nutty, and just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm from New York. I grew up in a liberal, secular, I couldn't care what, if you want to wear purple hair and worship a Q-tip, I'm cool with it. But, you know, when I first started after 9/11, I started trying to attend national security meetings, and somebody at one of the meetings said, if the OIC heard our conversation, they'd want to criminalize the whole conversation. And that's all they said. We were talking about terrorism policy. I thought they sounded crazy. A lot of people would have concluded they were crazy and written it off. I've had people do that to me. Oh, I don't believe you. Do you know anything about it? No. Did you ever hear the OIC? No. Well, how do you know what I'm saying isn't true? It just sounds crazy. Okay, I thought it sounded crazy. And I went back and looked up the UN resolutions. I looked up their own speeches, their own documents. And guess what? I learned that you can sound crazy and be right, because that is absolutely what the OIC is doing. I was shocked. And then I started learning more about it, more about Sharia, more about CARE. And anyway, so this is CARE. And by the way, the most disconcerting part of the censorship with CARE, they've also, by the way, shut down, gotten movies censored. And I wrote about that in my most recent book. It's a small part of the Hollywood issue, but they have managed to get scenes taken out. They don't want any movie to show anything about Islamic terrorism. Nobody has ever said that all Muslims are terrorists, but they want the movies to show anybody except for Muslims are going to be the terrorists. So, for example, there was a movie, Sum of All Fears, I didn't see it, where the protagonist was originally Muslims from Syria shooting down an Israeli pilot or something like that, and they protested. They lobbied the director and the producer, and they were able to get that changed to Australian neo-Nazis. Now, everyone who saw it told me the movie didn't make any sense because there probably aren't a lot of neo-Nazis in Syria. But anyway, so our U.S. national security apparatus, starting under Bush with the Department of Homeland Security memos, but moving on to really heavily expedited under the Obama administration, purged from our national security apparatus all language that identified, for example, they wouldn't say Islamic terrorism or jihad or anything like that. They're trying to disconnect the dots. So if you remember after 9/11, everybody was complaining, no one's connecting the dots. You know, we have, why was 9/11 able to happen? You have the FBI and the CIA. Was there enough information? No one's communicating. We have to connect the dots, connect the dots, connect the dots. All of this is an effort to disconnect the dots. There's no such thing as Islamic terrorism. And if you think so, you're a bigot. The other thing that you'll notice is there's been, in the last 3 years, a rise of anti-Islamophobia conferences, motions, statements. There have been across the country. You have to really pay attention. I had one somewhere. I don't even want to advertise it because I single-handedly was able to get it defeated. I was very surprised. I managed to talk to the head of the assembly there, who was a Democrat but a Jew, and he was actually willing, even though I didn't live in his area, someone recommended me to him, and he was kind enough to spend an hour with me where I told him this is not about bigotry. This is about disconnecting dots on national security. And he decided not to put the vote to the floor based on our conversation. But they are popping up in local assemblies, in counties, even in schools, in interfaith dialogue groups, where they make statements, condemning Islamophobia. So what's wrong with that? I don't think any of us want bigotry or discrimination against Muslims or Jews or women or anybody. But these motions do not define the term. It's vague and it's on purpose. If you look at the organizations that push these, the way they apply it is not in the sense of the word bigotry. They are conflating people who are truly bigots with people who have legitimate concerns about national security, human rights violations in the Middle East, religious freedom persecution by Islamic terrorists, or whatever it is. Those are legitimate concerns, and you can't raise them without being called an Islamophobe. When you ask these groups to define the word before you want to pass it, they won't. And we're not talking about, again, we're not talking about all Muslims, but they want to shut down the debate on ideas. And we should be able to discuss these ideas and discuss them on the merits. In America, we had in 2015 a bill that was proposed by a Democrat in the House, HR 569, to condemn anti-Muslim rhetoric. It was introduced right after a wave of attacks, of terrorist attacks in the West. So when you have a wave of Islamic terrorist attacks where people were killed, what's the first thing you want to do? Tighten up your national security? Make your borders stronger? Come up with sound national security policy? No. Let's condemn speech that says anything about those subjects. That is what this bill was. It was so flawed. I don't have time to go into everything wrong with it. I did write an article about it. But what I can tell you is, again, it was, first of all, why are we picking out just Muslims? Is it okay to say bad things about everyone else, but not about Muslims? Or what about the First Amendment? You know, people sometimes say things that aren't nice, sometimes say things that, you know, whatever it is, that is the price of free speech. So the people who are saying we should be tolerant and inclusive and divert, what do they mean by that? Does tolerance mean that you can't say anything? Does tolerance mean that you have to tiptoe around because you're afraid of offending somebody? Does it mean that you can't talk about really important policies like immigration or borders or national security because you're afraid what somebody else is going to say, because you don't want to be labeled a bigot, an Islamophobe, a racist, a xenophobe? That's not what tolerance is. Our founding fathers understood what freedom was, and freedom and tolerance means you look the other way and you have a marketplace of ideas, and the best idea will rise to the top. We should debate it. We should have robust political debate on all these issues. We should discuss it, and the best issues should win the debate on the merits. We shouldn't be silencing ourselves and censoring ourselves. So in Canada, so that's what's happening here. And I just want to mention, just so you know, I mean, I didn't used to, when I started doing this, first of all, I wasn't partisan. Second of all, when I started becoming partisan, I tried not to show it. Third of all, I really don't feel like I'm in a party now for various different reasons we won't go into. But the facts are the facts, and I just want you to know, 145 Democrats out of 186 Democrats signed on to that bill, co-sponsored it, 0 Republicans. It's not because I think the Republicans are so great, I don't, but the reason I mention it is because I'm letting you know where their headset is. This went nowhere because the Republicans were in control. It did not go to the floor for a vote. If they were in control, it would go to the floor, and it's a slippery slope. It starts by condemning speech. You know, people want to say, you don't have to worry about that here, like what's going on in Europe with all the censorship, prosecutions, fines, jailing of speech in Europe. Oh, you don't have to worry about that here because we have a First Amendment. But it's not a foregone conclusion because, as you see, we have a divided Supreme Court. All it takes is 5 Supreme Court justices to say that, quote, hate speech, whatever that means, and it's subjective, is not protected free speech, and then we will have hate speech laws. So and even if they're wrong, that will be the law of the land. Laws like that do not pass overnight. It starts by creating an environment where the people are willing to accept those restrictions on freedom. So it's a process. It starts with self-censorship, societal pressure, political correctness, policy guidelines like they have on college campuses. College campuses are rife with all kinds of unconstitutional speech restrictions these days. They are not the same as when you went to school, and they are not the same as when I went to school. It's a bedrock for, you know, they're tiptoeing around. They can't say anything, right? And then after that, you have civil violations where you fine people. You have the popping up of human rights commissions that don't want you to say anything, quote, offensive. And then the final stage is criminalization. So I'm just letting you know, you have to nip these things in the bud because it is a slippery slope. If you look around the globe and throughout history, there is no country that is immune. We live in a little bubble. We think we're always going to have freedom. You have to guard it. You can't take it for granted that it's going to be here for your grandkids. In Canada, which is just north of us, last year I was invited to go and speak on Motion 103, which is an anti-Islamophobia motion that passed in the Parliament. A lot of people were very upset about it. Nobody knew it was the same kind of problem. The motion passed and nobody knew what it meant. I did a lot of research on it, and it had in there a reference to a petition. It doesn't matter what it was. I don't want to give you too many details, but the point is, if you researched it and found out who was promoting it and what they meant by it, it really had very little to do with bigotry. It had to do with they didn't want you to talk about certain policies and have certain positions. You can't have certain positions, and if you do, you're an Islamophobe. So they've had a recent history of a lot of problems in Canada with speech censorship that is applied disproportionately to Islam. You know, they were issuing fines in the human rights tribunals there and the human rights commissions. People would get fined. They didn't have due process. It wasn't like real courts. They were commissions. And it was very easy to get convicted of hate speech laws. So they're still struggling with that now. In Europe, Geert Wilders, I'm sure, have you heard of Geert Wilders, has been criminally prosecuted. Now, you don't have to like him, but he's a politician. It is his job to talk about policy positions. That's his job. You don't like him? Don't vote for him. Why are you prosecuting him? In a Western country, this is not the Middle East, and it's not a Muslim majority country. It's like 5% Muslim over there. Why are they criminally prosecuting the leader of the Freedom Party, ironically? And he's advocating for the equivalent of a First Amendment in Europe. I think you can see he's not really winning that debate. But it was a very bizarre situation the first time around because, I mean, they charged him a second time in another forum, but it was a very bizarre position because he was a very popular politician for a while, and people were talking about maybe he'll become the prime minister. At the same time, he was being prosecuted, and people were thinking he'd wind up in jail. So a year later, he was acquitted, and there was the first time someone was acquitted in Canada under the hate speech laws against Islam in the Human Rights Commission. A lot of people were writing about both of these cases as a victory for free speech, but I'm not sure that's the case, because free speech should mean that you can have political debate and policy discussions on an intellectual level without fear of prosecution. If it takes you, I have a friend who someone filed. Well, CARE files a lot of lawsuits. It's not criminal prosecution, but they're, you know, like nuisance suits. They don't even necessarily expect to win. They're just trying to scare people and shut them up because they're going to bleed you dry. They have a lot of money and you don't. And I have a friend who was, someone filed a lawsuit against him. He never even mentioned those particular Muslim organizations. He mentioned one, and 7 others that he didn't mention said they were affiliated and filed a lawsuit for $1 each. Now, most people would be like, let me just pay the $1 and get them off my back. But then, of course, they use that as a win, of a substantive win, which it's not. They'll say they were right, they were discriminated, they were bigot, you know, everyone's a bigot. And so he fought it. 1 year and $100,000 later, he won his case. So that is not what free speech is. Not everybody has a year and the stress and the time and the money. Geert Wilders in France, Brigitte Bardot, the famous actress who became an animal rights activist, is against some of the practices in Islam. She's against the halal slaughter. She's against the, you know, they bleed the sheep in the streets during one of the Muslim holidays, and she's against that, and she's spoken up against it, and she has been fined 5 times in France. In Helsinki, there was a councilman, pointing this out, another politician, who criticized Muhammad's marriage practices. He was convicted of some kind of hate speech law. In Ireland, there was a 78-year-old pastor who said that he thought Islam was a satanic religion. You might not think so, and that's fine, but they arrested him. A 78-year-old pastor, and I'm sure you've heard about Tommy Robinson, who recently was arrested for reporting Islamic gang who are engaging in child rape or allegedly engaging in child rape. In Denmark, in Sweden, in Italy, in France, in Western free, non-Muslim majority countries, people are going to jail, not for calling someone names, not for refusing to give them a job, not for physically hurting them, for saying their opinion and for saying their views on policy issues. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of political correctness. I want to know, how is this happening in the West? You know, you can understand how this happens in the Middle East, but how is it happening in the West? The Muslims, and when I say the Muslims, I don't mean all Muslims. I'm talking about the Muslims who are engaged in this, just to be clear, in case someone wants to twist it around, because I know that's never happened. The Muslims who are trying to do this know that they can't do it alone. They know they can't. In their document, that 1991 explanatory memo, they say that they're going to form coalitions with progressive groups, and that's the word they use. They can't do it alone. The groups on the right don't seem particularly interested in aligning forces, so they have joined with other minority groups, whether it's Black Lives Matter. They've co-opted societal institutions, the interfaith dialogue, the academia, the media, and they just pump out a narrative, pump out a narrative, pump out a narrative. Nobody even really can define their terms. There's assumptions made. It's the politically correct thing. Oh, let's be nice. You know, everyone wants to think they're a nice person. You don't want to be a bigot, Islamophobe, racist. So the only way they get away with this is because we're allowing it. We're allowing it. We're allowing it, first of all, with policy review, the porous borders, which no other countries really allow in their own countries, but we're allowing it, the porous borders, but we're also allowing it with the political correctness, the false narratives, and the refusal to have discussions. Okay, I guess, oh, sorry, I'm going way late on my time. See, I didn't really, let me talk about the important thing, which is Abdul El-Sayed. I'm sorry. Okay, so Abdul El-Sayed, as you know, is running for governor, and he says that he identifies himself as an Arab American. I'm just pointing it out. Doesn't say American, he's a hyphenated American. He has dual citizenship with Egypt. His father emigrated here years ago, is a part-time Sunni imam at a mosque. His second wife, the father's second wife, was Protestant, converted to Islam, and Abdul used to be the vice president of the Muslim Students Association, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front group listed in that memo when he was in school. The MSA pledge says, Allah is my Lord, Islam is my life, the Quran is my guide, the Sunnah is my practice, Jihad is my spirit, paradise is my goal, and I will die to establish Islam. There's a little more to it, but that's the part I want to point out to you. It's very similar to the Muslim Brotherhood creed. You can find this online. You can find it. That is their, quote, pledge of allegiance. His wife was the president of that organization, and his wife's father used to be president of CARE Michigan, and he now sits on the board. And I think you already know that CARE is spawned out of Hamas and the Islamic Association of Palestine, both of which are state-designated terrorist organizations. In fact, CARE is deemed a terrorist organization alone in the UAE, not just as an outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood, but the CARE itself is deemed a terrorist organization in the UAE, but it operates with impunity in America. He says that his faith informs everything he does, and he describes himself as a devout Muslim who prays 5 times a day, puts his head on the ground 34 times a day, that his Islamic values are at the core of his work as a civil servant. He is constantly emphasizing that he has a funny name and brown skin. It didn't look that brown to me, but I guess it's a political advantage to claim it is. And he seems very quick to levy charges against anyone who wants to inquire into his background or talk about contentious issues like immigration or Islamic terrorism. Very quick to call names. You're an Islamophobe, you're a xenophobe, you're a bigot, you're a racist. And by the way, how did racist get conflated with things like Islamophobia? I mean, the reason it's so pernicious to be racist is because race is an immutable characteristic. Religion isn't. You know, there should be no policy, no idea, no religion that's off the table for scrutiny. We should be able to analyze it, discuss it, say, is it a good idea or a bad idea, and have an opinion about it. It's not the same. How it's not racist. So he's very quick to ask to levy those charges. And a similar thing if you want to talk about some of the issues that are related to it. He wants Michigan to be a sanctuary state, which means by definition that if that policy is implemented as a matter of policy, Michigan will purposely ignore federal law on immigration. He said that, quote, "We can't wait until some Americans are told that they're less American than the rest of us and made to leave," that, unquote. I have no idea what that means. I don't know what he's talking about. If people are coming in illegally, then not only are they less American, they're not American. And if he's talking about people that are here, I don't remember hearing anyone tell people who are American they have to leave. So I don't know what he's talking about. He probably doesn't know what he's talking about. And that he's tired of certain people being told that they can't be part of the solution. Something I've never heard. He says he's not running to be Muslim governor, but just to be governor. Yet, identity politics seems to be front and center at the core of a lot of his speeches, and frequently as playing the victim card. I just want to point out to you that if you're running for political office, what you believe matters. What you believe should be a matter of discussion. It should be subject to scrutiny. People have the right to know. So it's not that anybody cares if his wife wears a hijab or if he prays 5 times a day, but if he's saying, I'm not saying this, he's saying that his Islamic religious belief is at the core of his civil service work and informs everything he does, then I want to know, you should want to know, what is that? What does he believe? How will it impact Michigan policy? How will it impact what he wants to pass and do as governor? I think that's very important. So not only do you have a right to ask these questions of a public official, you have the duty to ask these questions. By the way, he was a supporter of the so-called Arab Spring, which you might know was really a Muslim Brotherhood uprising, and he is hardly a supporter of Israel, for those of you in the audience who are. He blames the failure of the surrounding Arab states to democratize on Israel, which is the only actual democracy in the Middle East. I don't know how you wrap your head around that, but that's what his beliefs are. So I am not here, especially, first of all, I didn't discuss with, the Michigan Jewish Affairs Council, what I believe or don't believe. I'm not here to endorse or oppose a particular candidate, and anything I say that can be construed that way are my beliefs, not necessarily the beliefs of the organization. But I am not here for the purpose of endorsing or opposing a particular candidate. This is not about Abdul's personal, private, spiritual beliefs. This is about his political views. This is about how his personal beliefs impact his policy positions from whatever source they come from. We should be able to have a discussion. That's what I want to know. Can we have a discussion? Can we talk about, is it a good idea or a bad idea to have a wall? Is it a good idea or a bad idea to have more stringent vetting of refugees? How about big government? Is it a good idea or a bad idea to have big government? Because according to him, Obamacare didn't go far enough. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to have, as a matter of policy, the flagrant violation of federal law as a sanctuary state? We should be able to have intellectual debate on these policies and let the best policy win without name calling. The name calling is a tactic to shut you up because they don't have anything else. I would just say that, yeah, name calling. And the second thing so the first thing is the censorship. Can we have a conversation about it? And by the way, so there's censorship and there's another thing, the redefinition of terms. So one is just to shut you up altogether, and the other is you have to pay a lot of attention to the language. The example I already gave was the racist. Like, racist just doesn't apply to a religion because a religion isn't a race. But they do it, and when I say they, I mean the people who are employing name calling. They do it with everything. You have to pay attention to what's a fact and what's a characterization and ask, don't use those name calling as a conclusion. Say, what are the facts? Evaluate the facts. With Abdul, he has also made a lot of statements that seem to be contradictory, and it's fair game to push for resolution on issues that appear dissonant. For example, he says he supports the LGBT, and I'm going to emphasize the T on this, the T community. I read an interview where he said he supported trans women, and I always get confused on this, so a trans woman is a genetic man, okay, the trans women, going into the locker rooms of the women. I'm guessing he wouldn't want that, I don't know if he has a daughter or not, but I'm guessing he wouldn't want that, his daughter's in there. His wife wears a hijab, she can't even show the hair on her head. But your kids, your daughters, should be in locker rooms with naked men who think they're women. Something about that doesn't sound right. I think that should be explored. He says he's pro-choice and supports abortion rights, and that's fine. A lot of people do. But then he says he's a devout Muslim. That's not allowed in Islam. Which is it? He says that he believes in separation of church and state. But he was the vice president of the MSA, where he made well, you have to ask him, did he take the oath? It seems like he would have to take the oath if he's the vice president of the organization, which says they want to establish Islam as dominant, which doesn't believe in separation of mosque and state. Although, to be fair, he said he believes in separation of church and state. So I wonder, does he only believe in separation of church and state and not separation of mosque and state? But I think this is something that should be asked. In an East Lansing debate, he said that he thinks the Constitution is great because there's no religious test for office. But he doesn't seem to really care too much about what's constitutional or not when it comes to other issues, like the big government issues. He appears to want to shut down inquiry into his past affiliations. You know, he'll say, oh, they're only against me because I'm Muslim. No, they're against you because you were vice president of a Muslim Brotherhood front group. And he doesn't want anybody to ask that. So, you know, every other politician gets scrutinized for everything in their background. Is he supposed to get a free pass just because he's Muslim? Is that what he's saying? Because that's what it sounds like. And then why is he lumping in racism with a belief system? Does he not believe we should be able to discuss these issues? And also, at the East Lansing debate, when it was Kolbeck who made a comment, and Abdul said to him, instead of really addressing the issue, whatever it was, I don't remember, just said that he was racist, making racist comments, and he said, you know, it's okay, I expect that, but what I want to know, and then he cited Martin Luther King, saying, I don't really know if this is what Martin Luther King said, I thought it was someone else, but whatever, that why isn't the rest of the GOP denouncing him? That it's the people, the good people who are silent, and why aren't they saying something when he makes an outrageous comment that's racist? That it's, you know, the silent people that he wants to address. And if that's the case, my question to him would be, why is he silent about the issues of the Muslim Brotherhood? Why doesn't he denounce at least the aspects of Sharia that are violent, that are inegalitarian, you know, that discriminate against Christians, Jews, and women? And if he's saying that we have an obligation to speak out if someone says something bad about Islam, well, does he have an obligation to speak out if something's bad about other people? So I think that's really it. I just let me just see if I can wrap up with something. Just give me 1 minute, and then I'll wrap up. Just give me a lot of. All right, so I just want to point out here that censorship is really not. It's not about being polite. It's not about being nice. At its core, it's a thought-stopping measure. Go read Orwell. It is a thought-stopping measure. They don't want you to have the language to discuss ideas. It's a tactic to shut everybody down, the redefining the terms, and this is really not about Abdul. I don't live here, so you're probably more informed than I am. I don't really think it looks like he's going to win this race, but he'll probably come back, and if he doesn't, others like him will. We are in a war of ideas. This is not about him. You cannot, I don't mean to, you know, you can't sit for 4 years and do nothing, and then come out 2 months before an election and wonder why no one's listening to you. You know, this is going to keep popping up. And I think you have to keep in mind, when you hear all the nice language about diversity and inclusion and tolerance, diversity isn't about skin color. It's about having different ideas. Inclusion isn't about what you look like. It's about what you think. We should be able to have conversations. This is not going to be over after this race. So I would encourage you, regardless of the outcome, to not, well, I'll take questions in a minute, to not sit and do nothing. I know a lot of you are busy. You have family, you have friends, you have your kids and your job. But, we're facing an uphill battle, especially in Michigan, and the demographics are going to get worse. They took me on a little tour, and I was a little horrified. If you can just do one thing, if each of you did one thing, once a week if you can, once a month if you can't, bring a friend to this. Bring someone who's sitting on the fence, someone who's at least open-minded but uninformed. Send an article to 3 friends and tell each of them to send it to 3 more, so there's a ripple effect. We have to get going. We don't want to wait until everything is too late and we're like Europe, and then you're wondering, oh, what happened? And then you have to explain to your grandchildren, like, how freedom slipped through your fingers. So I think that we can't take freedom for granted. We have to understand the importance of free speech and robust political debate. The price of freedom is vigilance. It is important to stand up on these issues because, as I said, it impacts everything: national security, religious freedom, and human rights. So be vigilant, speak up, stand up, get your messages out, and keep Michigan free. Thank you. Well, I'll be happy to take some questions. If you have some questions, is that what you were? This woman's had her hands up.
Okay, now. Okay, I'm gonna travel.
Oh, here, I'll put this. I know, he told me, yeah, thanks.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi.
I wanted to address what's happening in Michigan right now. The Department of Justice just waited. They wrote a letter this week in support of speech first, which is suing the University of Michigan for the position of speech codes, which are really tantamount to the stipend of free speech and censorship.
Right.
The question is, how much of this has been influenced when you look around universities across the country? There's a great editor on the Wall Street Journal. 2/3 of students at Harvard are afraid to express their opinion or fear of recrimination. So this is an insidious, horrific problem. How much of this do you think has been influenced by Islamist organizations?
To be honest with you, oh, okay, so I'm going to repeat the question. The comment was that DOJ filed an amicus brief in a court case against a college in Michigan where Michigan has speech codes that are purportedly unconstitutional. And the question was how much of, and then she mentioned that a lot of students are afraid to speak up on their opinions, and she wanted to know how much of that fear to speak up, I think, is influenced by Islamic organizations. Did I misunderstand that? Oh, the policies. Oh, I see. She wanted to know, oh, okay. She wanted to know how much the policies, the anti-speech policies on college campuses are influenced by Muslim groups. Well, you know, on the issue of Israel, the students are frequently shouted down, harassed, and even physically assaulted, and that is often sponsored by events by the Students for Justice in Palestine, and the whole climate and atmosphere on campus is an anti-Israel climate. It's not necessarily an official policy in terms of you can't talk. It just winds up being the result of who's around and the methods they're allowed to employ and maybe shouldn't be allowed to employ on the issue of Israel. On the broader issues of being able to speak or not speak, to be totally honest, there might be a portion from the Islamic groups, but as I said, it's a two-pronged problem. It's the Islamic groups and the politically correct, and I would say that a large portion of it is from the left. So I do think that most of it on college campuses is from the left. You know, they started out with speech codes where, you know, you can't say, and they have the whole list. You can't say this and you can't say that. You know, I read, I can't remember which school it was because I wasn't focused on the schools for this speech, but one of the handbooks said something like, you can't say you guys because what about the women? But it said, say y'all instead. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. What if you're from the North? It just, I mean, the list was just really over the top. And when the schools get sued for the speech codes, they usually lose. But then a lot of times they'll try doing something else. They'll have safe spaces. You know, like you can, safe spaces. You can talk in this little space. A safe space means no one's allowed to disagree with you. So you have this little space where they can say what they want, free from criticism, free from dissent. Then they have this other thing, free speech zones, which is also unconstitutional, where, you know, there'll be a designated area on college campus. You can say what and that, you know, so it just goes on. And then even when it's not something like zones, they have just the whole atmosphere, trigger warnings, microaggressions, targeting, oh, they know what you might unconsciously be saying something that they might unconsciously be offended by. I mean, we're raising a bunch of wusses. You know, our forefathers died. They sacrificed their blood, sweat, and tears for our freedom. And we're raising a next generation of people who are too afraid of permanent psychic injury from an idea. Yeah, let's have the next one.
I just wanted to mention, what is the purpose of silence? The end purpose is, do you know what the end purpose of censorship? This is for a reason that they're doing this, correct?
Yes.
And that is?
Okay, so the question was, what is the end goal of censorship? What is the purpose for which they're doing it? And the purpose is to shut down the debate. The ideal would be to have a discussion on the merits of various issues, and whoever wins the debate on the issues, whether it's Islamic terrorism policy or immigration or borders, we would have a discussion about it. But if they can silence the opposition by name calling or censorship, anybody who thinks this is an Islamic group, then we don't have, finish the answer, then we don't have to have a discussion on it. So it is a way for people to get power and to win the argument without ever having the discussion. That's the first reason. But in terms of the Islamic censorship, it also serves a secondary purpose. I don't know which is secondary and which is primary, but another purpose, which is to get non-Muslims to comply with blasphemy laws. Now, if it's against their religion to draw a picture of Muhammad, nobody's making them. They don't have to draw a picture of Muhammad. But if you're a Christian or a Jew or an atheist, why should it be illegal and criminalized for you to do it? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry. I was at a woman's group. My oldest were like 3 and 4. And this woman just turned to me. I told her, and she said, I am married to I'm an American, and I'm married to a Muslim, and they want to kill all Americans. My oldest will turn 51 this October.
Okay.
That's the purpose of censorship. They want to get in, and they want to take control, and jihad is the last step.
Well, they definitely want, so she was saying that some woman told her years ago that all the Muslims want to come and kill you. I'm not sure all the Muslims want to come and kill you, but they want control. As I said, they want a caliphate, they want Sharia that would apply to Muslims and non-Muslims. Some of them might want to kill you, but either way, they want your freedom gone and Sharia implemented. Anyone else have another question? Okay. 3. How about 1, huh? I can't hear you. Yeah, sorry.
I have a correction. You're in Detroit. Canada is south.
Okay. Okay.
Our picture is the Muslim celebration you were alluding to.
Yeah.
The chief part of the
Yeah. Yeah.
3. Do you do radio interviews?
I do a lot of radio interviews. Yes.
What contact you to set that up?
My website, which isn't updated, but it has a contact information there, and I do get that, and I will respond. Or you can catch me afterwards, and I'll give it to you. Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. The website, sir. I didn't tell you the website. Oh, it's www.vigilancenow.org. It only has partial listings of my work because I just don't have any help and I'm very busy. But next question. Yeah. Thank you for your interest and your corrections.
Thank you. One of my friends, Jewish friends, very local.
No kidding. A lot of your which friends are conservative? No. Oh, okay.
There are people that I know, when you hear my liberal friends about they only have to accept it, I understand there's something to do. How do you answer that?
The answer is very simple. It's not okay, so the question, what he said that he has Jewish friends who are liberal and Jewish friends who are conservative, and a lot of them say that when Muslims come here, this is America, and we should accept them the way we accept everyone else, and he wants to know how to reply to that comment. And my answer would be that let me just ask you, are you specifically talking about immigration or just people who are Muslim and how we view them? I'm asking you, were you talking specifically about immigration or just Muslims in general? Okay, Muslims in general. And the answer is, as I was explaining to some of the people in the car on the way over here, we don't believe in discrimination, including discrimination against Muslims, and we also don't believe in preferential treatment. That's how. So if you want to come here and live by our laws, which are egalitarian, you're welcome to do so. But we're not going to give you special preferences. We're not going to change who we are to accommodate you. If you want to come and assimilate and practice your religion on your own time, that's fine. I hope that answers it.
You made a comment at the end of your talk about sending articles to people, etc. There's a lot of people here who write letters about here send articles.
Good.
The problem, though, is that people who need to read these articles think about these things. So my question is, do you have some thoughts on how to approach people so that they'll open up their minds a little bit versus just giving a feel-good, calm reaction?
Okay, so the question was, he said that there are a lot of people in the audience who do write letters to the editor and send out articles, but the people they're sending them to don't want to read them. And what would I suggest of how to get people who are closed-minded to open their minds? And I hate to tell you this. I personally, if their minds are made up, I wouldn't waste my time. There are a lot of people who are open-minded and uninformed. There are a lot of people who are sitting in the fence. If you approach them in the right way, I personally have won over quite a lot of people you would never suspect, as we were talking about it in the car. You know, liberals in Manhattan, in the Village with black nail polish and tattoos, people on the Amtrak. You know, how you message it is important, and that's probably a speech for another time. But you can preach to the choir, which a lot of people in these circles do. It's always nice to get more information. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a numbers game. And we need more people, more people, more people. You can spend all your time bashing your head against the wall against somebody who has their mind made up, or you can use that same time winning over 10, 15 other people who are at least open-minded. So I think the first thing you have to do is make an assessment. Are they open-minded or not? If they're really not, I wouldn't waste my time. I know some people have a different approach, but if you've ever done telemarketing, for example, you know, it's a numbers game, and how much time you spend on one person, that's like 10 other people you could have been getting a yes from. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
If you could somehow flesh it out and give it to people, give them our hand,
Along those lines,
If I could put the question,
the question that you asked,
oh, the question.
you should ask.
Oh.
You say that, now, people may respond to that, something that can.
I'll see what I can do. Yeah.
I have something here that's a lot of my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I just read. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So he's handing out a card with the Muslim Students Association allegiance pledge. Yeah.
I was going to ask about what the Muslim women, Muslim women who are ferocious.
Right. That's a very good question. So the question was, what's in it for Muslim women to promote Sharia, since it doesn't seem like it would be to their benefit, but he's met several of them who seem pretty aggressive in their advocacy for Islam. I can say two things. One is, depending on if they were raised in America and how much they know, I have to tell you, I've met quite a lot of people who call themselves Muslim and even claim they love the Quran, and when you talk to them, they admit they've never read it. They know very little about their own religion. So they'll just believe if someone says, oh, it's this and that. You know, you hear a lot of propaganda and it sounds so swell, and maybe they buy it. That's one option. And the other is, I also think if they're raised in that environment, especially if they come from the Middle East, you know, they're brainwashed. They're indoctrinated from a very early age. This is what Allah wants. And I think part of the indoctrination is the disconnection of critical thinking and the installation of fear. And when you believe that this is what Allah wants, how are you going to eschew that? How are you going to disavow it? If that's what Allah wants and that's how you're raised and you really believe you're going to burn in hell if you think otherwise, and that's the environment you grew up in, then that's what their brain is filled with.
Deborah, we have a question from our community. I want to talk a little bit about Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You need to increasingly challenge people, turn people off, and out. And these are there alternatives. Is anybody really concerned about Google?
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, so the question was, what about Facebook, Twitter, Google, and YouTube that seems to be censoring people on the subject of Islam and disconnecting some of people's accounts where they get monetized for their videos, and are there alternatives? So, and are people concerned? So the first question is, yes, a lot of people have noticed this. A lot of people are concerned about it. I have to tell you, I think it's a real shame what Google is doing. I spend a lot of my time doing internet research, and Google used to be a great tool. Now, even when you type in, for example, the name of an organization and you know what you're looking for, it'll be pages before it comes up, even though that's the name. They took a good research product and they purposely ruined it, and it's a real shame. I was just telling them in the car that the other day I posted something on Facebook saying, I don't usually use that thing where it says, you know, I feel, it has like I'm feeling happy, sad, whatever, right? But I wanted to post, I'm celebrating. And apparently, according to Facebook, you can't just be celebrating, you have to be celebrating something. So I went down the list and I noticed it had Eid, and then it had Ramadan, and it had, you know, I was like, oh, well, it had a few Muslim holidays. Let me see if there are any Jewish holidays. Nothing. Not one. Yes, it is. Facebook Mark Zuckerberg. No Passover, no Hanukkah. No Hanukkah. And there are more Jews in this country than there are Muslims. Now, how the heck did that happen with Mark Zuckerberg? That's correct. So, and as far as they are, you know, I think you know, several people in these circles that have had problems with their accounts being disconnected, refusing to get like giving them the money and that. And as I understand it, there are some alternatives popping up. I'm unfortunately not, I mean, I've heard of some, like Patreon, but I don't know if that was good either. I am not the right person. Anyone else can vouch for this. I'm not the right person to ask about tech alternatives. I hear a lot of complaints. I see the censorship. The other alternatives aren't used enough, and I'm not really at the top of the tech, cutting edge to be the one to recommend alternatives. But yeah, it's a problem. Wait a minute, there was another portion to that. It was is it a concern, or people just, people are trying to raise awareness. I don't know what else can be done. I think it's a big problem that Mark Zuckerberg testified in front of Congress that he wants to, work with Congress on curbing hate speech. I think that's a big problem. It's going to be a problem for him too, because right now he's just the vehicle. Once he wants to be responsible for content, he's going to open up himself to lots of lawsuits. Have I met with the editor of the Detroit News, and if not, what? I'm only here for a short time, but I'm happy to talk to him by phone. Or if he's here, I'm happy to talk to him for a few minutes afterwards. No. Wait, I can't hear two people at the same time. I see. Okay, so the question was, have I met with the person, Nolan Finley, correct? The editor of the Detroit News, and if not, would I be willing to? And the answer is no, I haven't met with him, and yes, I'd be willing to. And apparently, according to the questioner, when some of the issues I raised about the East Lansing debate were raised, he didn't want to hear about it. Is that correct?
He wrote a blistering attack on Pat.
Oh.
He called him a business, the editor of our conservative paper.
Oh.
When he was approached afterwards and asked if you'd like information on the Muslim Student Association, which might some just say he's a very bright man. He said, I'm not interested, I don't want to.
Okay.
So the question
Okay, I got the question. The question is, so the question rephrased by another person in the audience was, apparently he's supposed to be the editor of a conservative publication, and who wrote a blistering article against Patrick Colbeck, and when people tried to provide him with information on the Muslim Student Association, he wasn't interested. I'm willing to give it a go, but if people are really closed-minded, I don't know, that's a big problem if he's the head of the conservative publication. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. Yeah. Next question.
Thanks for coming here.
Thank you.
You mentioned political correctness, identity politics, and Canada. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson, and do you follow him, and what do you think?
I don't normally like to talk about other people. I'm familiar with Jordan Peterson. No, I don't really follow him. Once in a while, I'll look at a clip. Whatever. It's fine. Yeah. Next question.
Tuesday night, the Charlie Board of Appeals voted 6-0 to stop another mosque.
Okay. The which Board of Appeals? Zoning. Okay. 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 So someone in the audience now just told us that the Zoning Board of Appeals just voted to deny zoning to another mosque in Detroit. So that's a point of information. And where? In a suburb of Detroit, sorry.
Yes, can you please tell us what law right Congress is reluctant to take up
And then weren't there other people too who had questions? I'll take it, but there was nobody else? I thought I saw some other hands. Okay, yeah.
why isn't our Congress taking up and revisiting and looking at chosen information on the old Warren trial? Older issued a letter of declaration, you shall not. Why don't you read it again? It was actually our Congressman Commissioner, Mike Rogers, who chaired the committee, put the cosh on it, and why is our Congress so reluctant to finally designate the Brotherhood as a terror?
Right. So the question was twofold. The first one, well, I'll address this first. I'm getting tired, but the two questions were, why isn't Congress revisiting the information on the Holy Land Foundation trial? Was that it? And the second question was, why is Congress reluctant to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization? I'll address the second one first. First of all, the Congress is not in charge of designating terrorist organizations. That is the role of the State Department. The bill that was up for consideration before, sponsored by Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, was to encourage the State Department to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. It didn't go anywhere. I think it's possible that it'll be brought up again. I hope it is. And if not, the State Department can certainly do that without any congressional legislation. And now that we have a new Secretary of State in the State Department, let's give a hand for Mike Pompeo. I'm hopeful that that will happen. I can't say that. I haven't spoken to him, but we certainly have somebody who has much more of a mindset to address these issues, and I think that's a good thing. The other question about Congress addressing the Holy Land Foundation, it also, again, wouldn't really be Congress. That would be the Department of Justice under Jeff Sessions, and, well, what can I say? Sir.
I heard recently that two Muslims had written a Senate resolution.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, actually, let me get a sip of water, just a minute, right? The question was, he said that recently there were a couple of Muslims who encouraged Marco Rubio to sponsor legislation that was hate group legislation, and could I comment on that? And the answer is yes, I can comment on that. That was SJ Resolution 49 that condemned hate groups, and it wasn't just, it was him, and then it was, I think Barbara Comstock, if I'm correct on that particular one, because there were a few bills that did similar things in the House, one in the House, one in the Senate, and it's a big problem because, again, how do you interpret words? I can tell you as a former appellate attorney, entire cases are won and lost on a word. How a word is interpreted, how a phrase is interpreted. What does that mean in the statute? When you have contracts, is it a valid contract? What is it? Do the two parties who enter it mean the same thing when they use that word? And when we talk about condemning hate groups, what does that mean? Who's going to decide? Who's going to be the arbiter of what is or isn't a hate group? Is the Center for Security Policy, where I'm a senior fellow, that's trying to expose the dangers of Islamic terrorism and Islamist ideology? Are we a hate group? According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, we are. And by the way, I've personally been named because of my book. They've never once disputed a single fact that I said, and most of the information I got was from the Muslim group's own websites, not me. That they condemn me as Islamophobic, but they've never disputed any of the facts. I'm a hater. Frank Gaffney's a hater. Ian Hersey Ali is a hater. Anybody who used to be Muslim and isn't anymore is a hater. And they are lumping people in who have legitimate national security concerns with people, with groups like the KKK and the Nazis. If you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center's website and scrutinize it the way I have, you will eventually find that they admit that they monitor, quote, right-wing groups. So left-wing groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter get a pass, number one. I mean, it's amazing to me that anybody who wants to raise the problem of groups that hold an ideology that is discriminatory against women and gays, that those are haters, and yet the groups that employ those get a pass. There's not one Islamic group, not one Muslim on it. Well, there's two Muslims, but they're listed as black separatists. There's not one person or one group on there for promoting Islamist ideology that's on their list. But the people who want to expose those groups are haters. They are purposely lumping it in, and if you research them enough, you will find that they admit that their purpose is to destroy, not to rebut, to destroy groups that hold these views. So Family Research Council, which is a conservative Christian group, they're on the list. Now, you might not agree with them. They believe in traditional marriage. How are you lumping in groups like that with the Nazi and the KKK? So I think when we talk about a word like that, hate is an emotion. It's subjective. who's going to make the determination, and then what's going to be, if you want to ask about what's the end goal, what's the end goal of labeling a group a hate group? What makes it hate? They're targeting the speech. You don't want to, they want to shut down the discussions and the ideas. And now we already have hate crimes, right? So a hate crime is when you have a crime and then you additionally have, from a protected class, comments that are against a protected class. So if you murder someone and then you scream, you N-word or whatever it is, there'll be an additional penalty. But if you want to, I totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I'm getting tired. All I can say is who's going to decide who is and isn't a hate group? Oh, hate incidents. So we already have hate crimes. Now they're talking about hate incidents. I want to put you on notice that anybody can report a hate incident. When you see all these statistics about hate incidents rising, first of all, CARE and other groups put in, they encourage people to report things. They're subjective. It could include, oh, you looked at me funny, or you this. It's an allegation, and it's not even necessarily an allegation of something that would be criminal if prosecuted. It's an incident. It's totally subjective. It could be a look, it could be a word, it could be a this, it could be a that, it could be true, it could be not true, and it all gets lumped into those statistics. So those are hate statistics, hate incidents, hate groups. It's subjective, and it's all designed to marginalize groups, to marginalize people, and ultimately, I do believe censorship is a big part of it. You have to ask Marco Rubio how he does that. So, yeah.
We're going to be wrapping up. I want to thank Deborah, but first I just want to share one thing with you.
Oh, can I say one thing before I forget?
Sure.
Oh, actually, so I did forget. If you have another group or if you want to contact me for radio, as I said, my website isn't really updated because I don't have any help, but I do get the messages forwarded to me. So it's www.vigilancenow.org. You can contact me through the contact section on the website, and I will get the message. And if you Google me, my name is a common name, but if you want to see more of my work that other people post to, if you Google Deborah Weiss, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, and then add to it free speech, or Deborah Weiss and Sharia, or Deborah Weiss, and also Deborah Weiss Motion 103, you'll see more.
And you can get a copy of her books at the back of the room where she's going to sign them for you.
Yeah,
Just
for purchase.
a quick comment. I want you to hear about this. So our major Jewish organizations here had an event last, I'm thinking it's May, and it had to do with the increase in hate and anti-Semitism and things like that since Donald Trump was elected. So I went to a specific workshop, the whole day thing, that was put on by the local Department of Justice. And they stated statistics about the different increases in hate and this thing and that thing. And Islamophobia was one of them. And I asked two specific questions. In keeping your statistics, what percentage of these reported hate crimes turn out to be fake crimes? They never happened. And the other question is, have you also tracked the amount of crimes that were committed since he was elected against Trump supporters? So, two answers. One is, those against Trump, those are not hate crimes because they don't qualify in that category. So you can't compare. And no, they don't keep statistics on the ones that were reported that turned out later to be false.
And now are you talking about crimes or hate incidents?
What the FBI puts into their statistics, when they report each year on statistics, the report.
So it's the allegations, not the convictions.
Exactly. So I thought that was very interesting. So you don't have any accurate record, and you will have people like Dawood Walid of CARE stand up in front of an audience and talk about the increases in Islamophobia and how terrible it is, but we don't know how much of those are fake. And he'll also say that people are afraid to report it. So we're sure that there's more going on. Anyhow, Deborah is kind enough to stick around and to sign her books, and we invite you to have cookies, coffee, tea, grapes. Please join us in the back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.